Hello, my name is Marina, and I never imagined I'd be writing this. For most of my life, I lived as a nun, fully devoted to faith, prayer, and service. My world was simple, guided by devotion and the certainty that I was walking the right path. But everything changed the day I died. At least that's what the doctors said. I remember the exact moment my soul left my body. What I experienced after that was beyond anything I had ever imagined. Jesus revealed things to me that shook me to my core, especially about the future and how people would survive without the mark. I have to share this with you because time is running out. It all began on a cold, rainy morning when my body first betrayed me. I had been feeling weak for days, but I brushed it off. As a former nun, I had lived a humble life, spending my time in prayer and helping those in need. But that morning, something felt different. I woke up with a strange heaviness in my chest, a tightness that made breathing difficult. My hands trembled as I reached for a glass of water, but before I could take a sip, my vision blurred. My legs buckled, and the world around me dissolved into darkness. I remember the impact of my body hitting the floor. Distant voices echoed around me, muffled and distorted, like I was underwater. My heart pounded erratically. Then suddenly, a wave of calmness swept over me. I wasn't afraid. I wasn't in pain. Instead, I felt an unexplainable peace. And then, I realized something shocking. I was outside my body. I could see myself lying there, motionless on the cold tile. My skin was pale, almost lifeless, yet I was still thinking, still feeling. I tried to move, but my body no longer obeyed me. That's when I felt it, an invisible force lifting me up, pulling me away from the physical world. I passed effortlessly through the ceiling, as though the walls and roof no longer existed. Below me, the streets, the buildings, the world I had known. Everything was fading into darkness. Then I heard it. At first, it was just a whisper. Then, the whisper grew into a voice calling my name. I tried to respond, but no sound came from my lips. I wasn't afraid, not yet. But deep inside, I knew my journey had only just begun. The moment I left my body, I understood what it meant to be truly weightless. There was no pain, no physical sensation, only awareness. I watched as my neighbor burst through the door, calling for help. I should have felt something, panic, desperation, but instead, I felt a strange detachment, like I was watching a scene from someone else's life. Then, the pull came again, stronger this time. It was drawing me into a place beyond anything I could comprehend. At first, I resisted, wanting to stay. But it was too powerful. In an instant, I was moving, fast. Darkness swallowed me. But it wasn't empty, it was alive. Whispers surrounded me, many voices overlapping, murmuring things I couldn't understand. Some sounded sorrowful, others were filled with rage. I tried to turn back, to fight against whatever was dragging me, but I had no control. Then, in the distance, I saw it. A light. It was faint at first, but as soon as I laid eyes on it, the voices around me began to fade. The light grew brighter, and with it came warmth, washing over me like a soothing wave. That's when I knew I wasn't alone. Something powerful was approaching. And deep in my soul, I realized this was not a place I could stay for long. As I was pulled deeper into the unknown, the warmth vanished. It was replaced by suffocating darkness. I wasn't floating anymore. I was falling. The air grew heavy, pressing against me, suffocating me. I couldn't see where I was going, but I could hear them. The whispers had returned, louder, surrounding me from every direction. They weren't words I understood, yet I felt their meaning. Regret, suffering, desperation. I tried to scream, to ask what was happening, but I had no voice, no hands, no body, only awareness. And that's when the fear took hold of me. Was this hell? Was I being judged? And then, out of the blackness, something appeared. A shape began to emerge from the darkness, distant at first, but steadily drawing closer. It wasn't quite a man or a woman, yet its presence was undeniable. A tall silhouette, faintly glowing, radiated something beyond words. The whispers that had once surrounded me fell silent the moment it arrived. I couldn't see its face, but I felt its gaze pierce straight through me. Then, with a slow and deliberate motion, it raised its hand. In an instant, I stopped falling. The air stilled, and the suffocating darkness that had swallowed me moments ago was gone. Instead, I found myself standing on solid ground that hadn't been there before. I wasn't sure where I was, but I knew I wasn't alone. The figure pointed toward the distance, and that's when I saw it. Another light. But this wasn't just light. It was someone. And as the figure moved closer, recognition struck me like lightning. It was him. Every fiber of my being knew who he was. I didn't need to hear his name because my soul already knew. Jesus. He didn't speak, yet his presence alone was overwhelming. It filled me with emotions too vast, too deep to put into words. Love, sorrow, and something else. A warning. His eyes met mine, and in them I saw everything. Then, he raised his hand. The darkness around us vanished, replaced by an endless landscape stretching beyond sight. It wasn't heaven, but it wasn't earth either. It was something in between. All around me, people wandered. Countless souls. Some looked lost, confused. Others knelt in silent prayer. A few turned toward me, their eyes wide with desperation, as if they wanted to speak but couldn't. Then Jesus finally spoke. His voice wasn't loud, yet it echoed all around me. Many will struggle in the days ahead. They will face a choice. The mock will come, and those who accept it will lose what is eternal. I didn't understand. Not at first. But then he continued. The world is changing. You must warn them. They will be told they cannot survive without it. But I will provide. A heavy silence followed. My mind reeled. What did he mean? Before I could ask, the scene around me shifted. Jesus raised his hand once more, and in an instant, I was no longer standing in that vast open field. I was somewhere far worse. I saw the earth, but not as I had known it. It was darker, colder. The cities were no longer the same. They were controlled. People stood in endless lines, their faces empty, their eyes hollow, as if something deep within them had been lost. They moved like shadows of themselves, obedient, lifeless. I turned to Jesus, and in that moment, I understood. This was the world after the mark. And those who accepted it, they were no longer themselves. I wanted to scream, to run, to wake up from whatever this was. But instead, Jesus reached for me, and suddenly, I was falling. Not into darkness, not into fear, but back into my body, back into the world I had left behind. The moment he touched me, everything changed. The visions, the lost souls, the unbearable weight of what I had seen. It all vanished in an instant. A force stronger than gravity yanked me downward, pulling me through layers of existence. Light and darkness swirled together, spinning around me as I tumbled through the unknown. Then, suddenly, I was gasping for air. My chest ached. My fingers twitched. My vision blurred. I could hear voices, urgent and frantic. A neighbor was calling my name. I tried to sit up, but my body felt foreign, like I had been away from it for too long. Every breath burned. Every movement was like dragging stone. But none of that compared to the weight of what I had just witnessed. Tears streamed down my face as the reality sank in. I had died. I had met Jesus. And I had been given a message, a warning. But why had I been allowed to return? The question haunted me in the days that followed. My body was weak, but my spirit was restless. No matter how hard I tried to push it away, I couldn't forget what I had seen. The future. A future where people would be forced to make an impossible choice. The mark, whatever it was, wasn't just about survival. It was about control. And those who accepted it would never be the same again. They wouldn't just lose their freedom. They would lose something far deeper. I prayed desperately for answers, for clarity. And then one night, I had a dream. In it, Jesus stood before me once more. His eyes held both sorrow and urgency. "Tell them," he said, "many will be deceived. They will believe they have no choice, but I will provide." I woke up in tears, my heart pounding. The message was clear. People needed to know. But how? Who would listen to me, a former nun? Who would believe what I had seen? Then, deep inside, I felt it, an undeniable calling. I didn't need to convince the world. I just needed to speak. The truth would find those who were ready to hear it. Even if only one person listened, it might change their fate. I had spent my life studying the Bible, praying, seeking wisdom. But after what I had seen, I realized how little I truly understood. The world was standing at the edge of something unprecedented, something most people weren't prepared for. In the vision, the mark wasn't just a physical symbol. It was a test of faith, a test of trust. It wouldn't be forced on people, not at first. It would be offered as a solution, a necessity. I saw leaders, governments, even religious figures standing before crowds, assuring them it was for their own good. "You won't be able to buy or sell without it," they would say. "It's the only way to survive." And far too many would believe them. But Jesus' words echoed in my heart. They will think they have no choice, but I will provide. That was the key. Those who rejected the mark wouldn't be left to suffer alone. God had already made a way. But only those who placed their full trust in Him would find it. I knew many wouldn't understand. They would mock me, call me crazy. But that didn't matter. My mission wasn't to convince. It was to warn. Because when the time came, those who remembered my words would know what to do. After my experience, I felt drawn to a different kind of life, a life of preparation. Not just for myself, but for those who would need guidance when the moment arrived. Jesus had shown me something crucial: faith, community, reliance on God, not the systems of this world. So I started learning. I learned how to live without depending on modern conveniences, how to grow food, how to sustain myself in ways I had never considered before. But more than anything, I prepared spiritually. Because the battle ahead wouldn't just be physical. It would be a war for souls. Fear would be the greatest weapon used against people. I had seen it in my vision. Those who gave in didn't do so because they wanted to. They did it because they were afraid of hunger, afraid of isolation, afraid of suffering. But here's the truth. Those who stood firm would not be abandoned. Miracles would happen. Doors would open where there seemed to be none. Just as God had provided for His people in the past, He would do so again. The real question was, would people trust Him? I had seen both sides of the future. I had seen the sorrow of those who gave in, and the radiant strength of those who stood firm. The difference wasn't in their circumstances. It was in their faith. That's why I'm sharing my story. Not to spread fear, to spread hope. Because when the moment of decision comes, I want you to remember, Jesus has already made a way. You just have to trust Him enough to follow it. Again and again, I ask myself the same question. How would people survive if they refused the mark? it seemed impossible. The world I had seen was completely controlled. Every transaction, every resource. Those who didn't comply were cut off from everything. But then I remembered Jesus' words, "I will provide." The answer wasn't inside the system, it was outside of it. The people who stood firm weren't living in the cities, dependent on stores, banks, or government aid. They had learned to live differently. I saw hidden communities, small groups of believers who had prepared in advance. Some had fled to the wilderness, growing their own food, sharing resources. Others remained in the cities, relying on underground networks of support. And then, there were the miracles. I saw people with nothing suddenly finding food in the most unexpected ways. God had not abandoned them. He never would. But would they trust him enough to let go of the world's security and step into his provision? That was the real question. And soon, very soon, every person will have to answer it. I saw gardens flourishing in places where nothing should grow, water appearing in dry lands, the sick being healed without medicine. It wasn't just survival, it was divine protection. But the key was faith. Those who doubted, who let fear consume them, struggled. They hesitated, and in their hesitation, they lost everything. When the time comes, you must be ready to walk away from the world system without looking back. One of the most terrifying revelations Jesus showed me wasn't just how people would accept the mark. It was what would happen to them afterward. At first, it seemed harmless. A small procedure, a simple agreement. People took it because they were desperate, believing it was just another step in modern society. But once they accepted it, something inside them changed. It wasn't immediate. At first, they felt relieved. They could buy food, travel, live without fear. But then, over time, something faded. Their eyes lost their light. Their emotions dulled. They became obedient, not just in action, but in thought. I saw families torn apart. A husband who had taken the mark no longer recognized his wife because she hadn't. A mother who had accepted it felt nothing for her unmarked child. The bond between them was severed, as if a piece of their soul had been taken. Jesus' sorrow was deep as he revealed this to me. "They have chosen the world over me," he said, "and the world has claimed them." It wasn't just a physical mark, it was spiritual submission. And once taken, there was no turning back. That's why the choice will be so critical. It won't just be about survival. It will be about your eternal soul. A new understanding. When I returned to my body, I saw Scripture in a new light. Prophecies I once thought were symbolic now seemed painfully real. I remembered the warnings in Revelation. "And he causeth all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads, and that no man might buy or sell, save he that had the mark." Revelation 13:16-17. For years, people debated what this meant. Was it technology, a government policy, a religious decree? But after what I had seen, I understood. It was all of those things, and more. It was a test of loyalty, one that would separate those who trusted in God from those who trusted in the world. I looked at history, the stories of believers who faced persecution before. The early Christians, forced to choose between worshiping Roman gods or facing death. The persecuted church, throughout the ages, given the same choice: comply or suffer. The pattern had always been there, and soon it would return, on a scale the world has never seen. The real preparation. That's why Jesus sent me back, to remind people that this isn't just a political battle. It's not just about technology. This is a spiritual war, and only those who stand firm in faith will endure. The visions, the warnings, the overwhelming presence of Jesus, it all led to one thing: a call to prepare. But preparation isn't just about stocking food or finding shelter. It's not just about learning survival skills. The real preparation is within. Jesus didn't show me these things to cause fear. He showed me so that people could strengthen their faith before the storm arrived. Because when the time comes, hesitation will be dangerous. I saw people who thought they had time, people who said, "I'll decide when it happens." But when the moment arrived, they weren't ready. The pressure was too much. The fear was overwhelming, and they fell. But the ones who stood firm, they weren't necessarily the strongest or the smartest. They were simply the ones who had already decided. They had built their faith like a fortress. Choose now, so my message is simple. Choose now. Decide where you stand, before the world forces you to choose. Grow. Grow in faith. Learn. Learn how to live outside the system. Surround yourself with others who will stand with you. And above all, trust Jesus, because in the days ahead, that trust will be the difference between falling into darkness and walking in the light. Since returning, I often wonder, who will stand when the time comes? Jesus showed me. It won't necessarily be the people you expect. It won't be those who were merely religious. It will be those who truly know Him. And when the moment arrives, will you? It wouldn't be those who simply attended church, but never truly surrendered their hearts. It wouldn't be those who spoke of faith yet lived in fear of losing their comfort. The ones who would stand in the end, they were different. They had already died to the world. I saw them in my vision. Men and women, young and old, from every race and background. They weren't the wealthiest, the most powerful, or the most educated, but their faith was unshakable. Some had been preparing for years, sensing what was coming. Others woke up only at the last moment. But still they stood firm, refusing to bow, even when it cost them everything. They all had something in common: a deep, unwavering trust in God. They knew they were never alone. Even in hunger, He would provide. Even in danger, He would protect. Even in death, they would live. The Great Divide. In my vision, Jesus showed me something chilling, a line being drawn. On one side were those who had chosen the world. They took the mark, thinking they were securing their future. They mocked those who refused, calling them foolish, paranoid, extremists. On the other side stood those who refused. They lost their jobs, homes, place in society. They were cast out, hunted, imprisoned, or worse. But the real separation wasn't just physical, it was spiritual. At first, those who took the mark seemed unchanged, just relieved that they could live normally again. But then, over time, their hearts hardened. Their minds dulled to spiritual truth. They lost something sacred, their connection to God. Those who refused, however, shined like stars in the darkness. Even in suffering, they radiated peace. Even in hunger, they found provision. Even when the world abandoned them, God never did. And then Jesus' voice echoed in my soul. In the end, all will choose. No one will be neutral. There would be no middle ground, no way to avoid the decision. Everyone would have to decide. Who do you trust more, the world or God? The choice has already begun. This great separation isn't coming. It has already begun. As I write this, my heart is heavy, not with fear, but with urgency, because I know so many are still asleep. So many believe they have time. I used to think that too. I thought faith was just something to hold on to for comfort, something to turn to in hard times. But I didn't understand. It is the only thing that will truly matter. Jesus didn't show me these things so I could keep them to myself. He sent me back to warn you. Time is running out. I don't know how much longer we have, but I do know this. The world is changing faster than we can see. The systems that will control people are already being built. The deception is already spreading. But there is hope. There is always hope. Tell them I am coming. Before I returned, Jesus spoke one last time. Tell them I am coming. And I believe him. So my message to you is this: prepare now. Strengthen your faith. Build your trust in God. Surround yourself with people who will stand with you. Stop relying on the world. It will betray you. The days ahead will be difficult, but we were chosen to live in this time for a reason. And for those who stand firm, there is a promise, a kingdom far greater than anything this world could ever offer. The choice is yours, but choose now, because soon there will be no more time to decide. The grand deception of all the visions Jesus showed me, one of the most deceptive was how the world would embrace the mark. Not with fear, but with relief. In the vision, the world had already been through chaos, economic collapse, disasters, wars. Everything had broken down. People were desperate, begging for stability. That's when a new system was introduced. It wasn't presented as control. No, it was sold as a solution. Leaders stood before the people, promising, the suffering is over. A new era is beginning. Safety, prosperity, peace. It's here. And the world believed the lie. They cheered. They celebrated. The mark wasn't just a requirement, it was a badge of honor. Those who took it were praised, rewarded, given access to. At first, those who took the mark were told they were part of something greater. They had food, shelter, jobs. The world promised them security, progress, and a new beginning. They believed they were moving forward together. But then I saw those who refused. They weren't seen as individuals making a personal choice. They were labeled as threats. The news called them extremists, dangerous, obstacles to a better future. Friends turned on them. Families disowned them. Society rejected them. And what shook me the most? How easily people accepted this division. Those who had taken the mark no longer questioned it. They didn't stop to wonder why their own loved ones had suddenly become enemies. Their minds had been given over to deception. But even in the middle of this darkness, I saw something else. Pockets of believers standing firm. They weren't afraid. They had seen this coming. And because of that, they were ready. The first stage, cut off at first. The unmarked weren't hunted down. They were simply cut off. I saw a woman standing in a grocery store, her children beside her. Her hands trembled as she picked up a loaf of bread. She walked to the counter, offering cash. But the system wouldn't allow it. The cashier looked at her with sympathy. But rules were rules. "I'm sorry," he said, gesturing toward the scanner. "You need the mark." Tears filled her eyes as she clutched the bread. Her children were hungry. They hadn't eaten in days. But she shook her head and walked away, empty-handed. That was how it began. The unmarked couldn't buy food, get medical care, or travel. They were told it was their choice. They had refused the system, so they had to accept the consequences. But over time, the restrictions grew harsher. The media began spreading fear, claiming the unmarked were a danger to society. Governments passed laws banning them from public spaces. The world turned against them. The second stage, stripped of everything. I saw a man who had once been respected, a doctor. He had spent his life saving others, but when he refused the mark, his license was revoked. He was called irresponsible, unfit to practice. I saw young people thrown out of their homes, rejected by their own families. They had nowhere to go, no way to survive. And then came the next phase, the third stage, forced compliance. At first, it wasn't violent. The unmarked were just relocated for their own good. That's what the authorities called it. Special camps were set up, places where they'd be given a chance to reconsider. But inside those camps, I saw the truth. They were stripped of everything, their dignity, their rights, their freedom. Some broke under the pressure. They gave in, taking the mark just to escape the suffering. But others stood firm. And for them, the world had only one answer: elimination. The last remnant. Then Jesus showed me the final group, the last remnant of those who refused. These were the ones who had endured everything: starvation, persecution, exile. They had lost homes, families, even their names. But their faith had only grown stronger. They weren't just hiding in the wilderness or running from the system. They had learned to live outside of it completely. I saw communities, small and hidden, built in the most remote places. They had nothing the world could control. No reliance on technology, no dependence on government aid. And yet, somehow, they thrived. Food grew where none should have. Water appeared in the driest places. The sick were healed without medicine. It wasn't just survival. It was divine protection. And the key? Faith. These weren't just acts of survival. They were miracles. I saw a young girl, barely 10 years old, kneeling beside a dying man. The doctors had said there was no cure. But as she laid her hands on him and whispered a prayer, his body was healed instantly. I saw an elderly woman, weary and frail, kneeling in the dirt, hands clasped together. "Lord, please, we have no food." Moments later, a stranger arrived carrying a loaf of bread. "I don't know why," he said, his voice uncertain. "Something just told me to bring this here." And in that moment, I heard Jesus' voice echo in my soul. "I will provide." But then came the final test. The world had been searching for these believers, desperate to bring them under control. They saw them as the last resistance, the final obstacle standing in the way of total rule. The last stand. I saw soldiers marching toward one of the hidden camps, their boots crushing the earth beneath them. They carried weapons, but more than that, they carried deception. A man in a crisp suit stepped forward, his smile carefully rehearsed. "We don't want to hurt you," he said smoothly. "We just want you to join us. Life will be so much easier if you do." No one moved. His smile faltered. Then he played his final card. He turned, gesturing to the children. "Think of your little ones," he said softly. "Do you really want them to suffer?" The air grew heavy. For a moment, it seemed as if the people might waver. But then, an old man stepped forward. His face was lined with scars, his hands rough and weathered by time. Yet his voice was steady. "You cannot take what does not belong to you," he said. "Our souls are not for sale." The man in the suit sighed. "So be it." He turned to the soldiers and gave the order. The believers were surrounded. Some were dragged away, never to be seen again. Others were given one last chance to accept the mark. Not a single one did. And then, the sky opened. A light poured down, brighter than the sun itself. The soldiers collapsed, covering their faces in terror. But the believers, they stood tall. Jesus had come. In an instant, everything changed. Those who had stood firm were lifted up, taken from the suffering, taken beyond this world. And those who had chosen the world, they were left behind, realizing too late what they had done. The vision ended there, but the message was clear. Stand firm. Hold fast. The world will tempt you, pressure you, try to break you. But if you trust in God, He will deliver you. This is why I was sent back. Not to scare you, but to prepare you. Because the time is coming. And when it does, I pray you will be among those who stand until the very end. Because Jesus is coming back. And when He does, everything will change.